Of some silences, the weight feels heavier than a sentence. Mine began one July afternoon, when my son came to visit me with a bouquet of flowers and a lawyer. It wasn't the first time Lucas tried to soften the blow with kind gestures. But that afternoon, his smile felt rehearsed. He had that way of clenching his jaw he inherited from his mother, though in him it showed more calculation than tenderness. Emma, his wife, stayed in the car, scrolling through her phone. She always did. She couldn't stand the slowness of my steps, nor the scent of incense that still burns Anna's memory into the walls of this house. We live in a quiet area, north of Eindhoven. The house is old, honey brick, with wooden shutters that creak when they close. From the garden, you can hear the murmur of the Dommel River when the wind blows south. Anna and I bought it back in '86, when Philips was still an empire and the streets looked as if they'd been drawn for the future. "Father, we need to talk about something important," Lucas said, setting the flowers on the table. His lawyer, a young man with immaculate hands and a neutral voice, opened a folder. "The matter is delicate, Mr. Groot. Your son believes it would be wise to establish partial guardianship, for your own well-being." They said that word guardianship as if it were a favor. I poured myself a coffee and watched them in silence. Outside the window, bicycles glided past with the lazy rhythm of Dutch summer afternoons. The sky had the color of tarnished copper. I thought of Anna, and how she might have reacted. Lucas avoided my gaze. He'd always been impulsive, but never a coward. That evasive look revealed something worse than betrayal, guilt. "Guardianship?" I repeated slowly, turning my cup. "I don't think I'm quite so far gone that someone needs to manage my life." The lawyer cleared his throat. "It's not full incapacity, Mr. Groot. There are simply recent behaviors that worry your family. Financial movements, erratic decisions." That's when I knew they'd been digging. Money. It's always the money. No one, not even Lucas, knew about the 16 million. It was the secret Anna left me before she died. Hidden in a blue folder behind a false panel in her desk, along with a handwritten note, "In case they ever try to erase you, Noah. Trust only what we signed together." She had been more foresight than all of us. Over the next few weeks, Lucas's visits became constant. He arrived with smiles, with pastries, with excuses to check my papers. Emma played the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law, but her eyes always wandered through the house with the hunger of someone measuring a prize. I feigned clumsiness. Dropped my keys, forgot dates, repeated stories. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. Some truths only reveal themselves when one pretends to be weak. I remember a morning when I walked to the center of Eindhoven. The sun fell gently over the market, terraces full of students and families. I sat at the Happiness Cafe, facing the square, with my black notebook and an espresso. I wrote 3 names, Lucas, Emma, Anna. Then I drew a line connecting them. At the end, I wrote my own name and drew a circle around it. The circle was the defense. Anna had prepared everything: legal documents, account statements, voice recordings, encrypted emails. She'd built, without me knowing, a fortress of paper and proof. It took me days to grasp the magnitude of her foresight. I even found letters addressed to a trusted lawyer, a man named De Vries, over in Strijbes. I went to see him unannounced. His office was in a renovated industrial building, sunlight pouring through the wide windows as if it were a witness. He was about 50, with an honest gaze and a deep voice. He offered me a glass of water and a sealed folder. "Your wife trusted that you'd know when to open this," he said. The seal bore the date of Anna's funeral. I opened it right there. Inside were proofs, photographs, copies of bank transfers, online betting records. All in Lucas's name. Debts with gambling houses, attempts at fraud using my identity, even messages with Emma, plotting how to convince the court of my supposed dementia. I didn't feel anger. Only a dense calm, like the moment one finally understands that love, too, runs dry when it's used as a weapon. That evening, I walked home along Kleinberg, the sun hiding behind sand-colored facades. I bought a bouquet of yellow tulips, Anna's favorites, and placed them beside her photograph. In silence, I said, "You were right, as always." From that moment, I began to plan my own game. Not an act of vengeance. A closure. I called De Vries 2 days later. "It's time," I told him. And he understood. The summer moved forward with that suspicious calm that precedes a storm. While Lucas persisted in his filial concern, I gathered every piece of the puzzle. I discreetly signed the legal powers, reviewed the evidence, and made sure every bank transaction bore the trace of my full lucidity. One night, Emma called, pretending warmth. "Noah, we'd love to have you over for dinner on Friday. It's been too long since we shared something nice as a family." I replied politely. I accepted. That dinner would be the turning point. When I hung up, I looked around. The house smelled of old wood, of coffee, of memory. On the shelf, the wall clock kept marking the hours with that patient sound Anna loved. I thought about how everything we built could be reduced to a number, a figure our son didn't even deserve to know. But no, this wasn't about money. It was about dignity. And that, I thought, isn't inherited. It's defended. Some dinners are served as traps. They're prepared with fine wine, warm lights, and borrowed laughter. That Friday's dinner had all of it and something more, a silence I already knew. The kind that hums when someone is calculating behind a smile. I arrived on time. It was a modern house, clean lines, a terrace at the back. A scented candle burned at the entrance. The smell was sweet, almost sticky. It reminded me of those hotel hallways where no one ever sleeps completely at ease. Emma opened the door as if I were some distinguished guest, not the uncomfortable father who carried too many memories with him. "You look great," she said. "Did you bring the cream I recommended?" I nodded without enthusiasm. The pretense of self-care had been her bridge into my drawers, my email, my calendars. I realized it too late, but I realized it. Lucas appeared with 2 glasses of white wine and that fixed expression of cordiality he'd worn ever since lying became a way of life. "To your health, father," he said, handing me a glass. I took a sip. It was chilled, pleasant enough. On the table, fresh pasta, goat cheese salad, bread with a perfect crust. Summer drifted through the windows like a weary guest tired of being ignored. Outside, bicycles passed, and the soft murmur of a city that had learned how to move quietly. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" Lucas asked, folding his napkin with his usual precision. "I've thought," I said. "And I've decided I will not accept a guardianship. No shouting. No gestures. Just a brief pause." Emma set down her fork delicately. Lucas drew a deep breath. "We don't want to fight," she said. "We're just worried you're making rash decisions." I didn't ask which decisions she meant. The financial movements their lawyer mentioned hadn't been a coincidence. They'd tried to tie loose ends by force. The plan was simple: provoke a shaky diagnosis, nudge a judge, and get access to my accounts. That one phrase, "we're worried," already carried the sentence within it. I looked around, the spotless kitchen, the clinical order of the dining room, the library that looked bought by the set. I wondered how much debt hid inside that order, how much noise had been buried beneath it. "Noah," Emma continued, "there are things you're not telling us. You spend money in strange ways. You forget appointments. Lucas worries about you." "Lucas worries about Lucas," I said quietly. "And about his talent for gambling without consequences." I didn't look at her. I looked at him. He met my eyes for a second, then lowered his. There was my son, the boy who used to cover his face whenever he broke something. I wanted to ask him when he got lost, but it was no longer the moment for nostalgia. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, but his hands betrayed him, the slightest tremor, barely perceptible, of someone afraid of being read aloud. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The wine helped pretend at normalcy. When they offered dessert, I declined. My briefcase sat beside my chair. Inside, the folder. I made no move to show it. Sometimes the truth weighs more when it's dropped in the right place. "There's a lawyer," Lucas said. "He wants to talk to you. To explain how we could arrange things without it seeming forced." "I understand what you're trying to arrange," I said. "And I also understand that the two of you are closer to prison than to an inheritance." It was the first time I heard myself speak with that coldness. It wasn't anger, it was a clean, straight line. Emma opened her mouth, indignant, but she didn't have a good script for that scene. "Prison?" Lucas said. "What are you talking about?" I picked up the briefcase, took out the folder, set it on the table between the salad and the bread. His initials, LG, shivered faintly under the light. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. "Your mother was better at the long game than any of us," I told him. "And she left notes, documents, names. If you want, we can go through them now. Or, if you prefer, the prosecutor can do it Monday. Makes no difference to me." Emma looked at him as if she could rearrange him with her eyes. Useless. Her hands began to sweat, I could tell by the odd way she held her glass, leaving her fingerprints on the surface. I'd seen that gesture before, in small domestic crises, when debts crept under the door like a draft of cold air. "You have no proof," Emma said. Not of anything serious." "I have enough," I replied. "Transfers to betting platforms. Credit applications using my identity. Messages between you two about how to gently guide me toward a cognitive evaluation. And recordings. I didn't say that I'd listen to every one of them in the small hours, headphones on, while the wall clock bit away the minutes. I didn't say that sometimes I'd pause just to look up at Anna's portrait, as if I might find there a better explanation for the son we'd raised. I didn't say that in one of those recordings, Emma spoke the word incapacity in the same tone one uses to ask for a discount. Lucas turned off the kitchen lights and switched on the terrace lamps. A useless gesture, as if changing the lighting could rewrite the scene. Their garden was small, elegant, perfectly trimmed. In the distance, the hum of a party, perhaps in Gestel, perhaps a neighbor's backyard, floated through the warm night air. It was July, and Eindhoven was breathing easy. "We're all going to regret this," Lucas said. "This can still be solved within the family." I looked at him. I saw both my son and the man he'd chosen to become. The two images didn't align. I clenched my jaw not from rage, but to stop myself from saying something that would ruin the angle I'd earned. "Family isn't fixed with deceit," I said. I stood, took the folder. I didn't need it there, not anymore. Driving home, I kept the windows open, letting the summer air scrub my throat clean. The sky held that lingering blue that refuses to darken. I passed the canal, crossed toward the center, saw the lights along Kleinberg, the terrace is full, people with beer glasses in hand, light, almost happy. I thought about how many lives like mine moved among them, carrying betrayal in their pockets, balancing carefully so it wouldn't show. I slept little. In the morning I sat at the dining table with a strong coffee and, as I breathed, I sorted my priorities: lawyer, doctor, bank, prosecutor. By 11 I was already at De Vries's office in Strijbes, the place smelling of new wood and old metal, a balance of times like the city itself. "It's time to activate everything," I told him. "We filed the complaint. And we ask for precautionary measures." De Vries, who doesn't ask unnecessary questions, nodded. He took notes with that tidy handwriting of people who don't get lost. Days earlier he had asked me to go with company to a cognitive evaluation at the Katharina. I went. Correct answers, memory intact, orientation perfect. I took the report from my briefcase and placed it in front of him. We get ahead of them, he said, satisfied. This is solid. Then he unfolded the rest. The evidence Anna had assembled had an almost pedagogical structure. Timelines, screenshots, cross-check dates, potential witnesses. I understood that she never improvised. Not with life. Much less with her exit from it. There's one recording in particular, De Vries said. A call from Emma with a third party. She suggests manipulating your medication to induce confusion. Were you on medication? Supplements and a statin. Nothing else. Perfect. This is serious. Enough for the prosecutor to request preventive detention if they tried something. I didn't answer. I pictured Emma in my pantry the afternoon she offered to organize vitamins and boxes of tea. I remembered how precisely she arranged everything by color. I wondered if, while she ordered the shelves, she was also calculating the blow. Evil doesn't always come with horns, sometimes it arrives groomed and with manicured nails. Leaving the office, I walked slowly through the arcade, under the reclaimed bricks and new murals. Stridge best concentrates an energy I like, once industry, now workshops, cafes, design, people inventing. I sat at an outdoor table for a while. I ordered sparkling water. Took out the black notebook. Wrote 3 words, prudence. Pace. Evidence. I kept telling myself speed isn't a virtue when you seek justice. The process began that same week. The police summoned Lucas and Emma. Seeing them enter the brick building, masks dangling from elbows out of habit, the remnants of a custom, stung me with something like pity. Not for them exactly, but for the boy I once held on my shoulders, for the summers at the lake, for that afternoon when I taught him to ride a bicycle and, at 4, he applauded me like I was a hero. Memory is a harsh judge, it brings evidence no one asked for. Do you want to testify now or wait for your lawyer? The officer asked. They said nothing. That silence says things too. De Vries told me not to speak more than necessary. I obeyed. I answered only questions, with the calm of someone who has rehearsed the steps in his head like choreography. Outside, the sun struck with almost indecent clarity. I walked to the Van Abbe Museum. I like that place, the architecture, the water around it, the silent promise of paintings that are never in a rush. I didn't go in. I sat on a bench at the side and let the view do its work, a way to support the mind when the heart trembles. A group of teenagers laughed nearby, throwing pebbles into the canal. I remembered Lucas at that age, his frank, unburdened laughter. I wanted to cling to that memory like a stake in a rising tide. You can't. Time doesn't offer ropes, only small handholds. That afternoon I received a message from Emma, we can talk without lawyers. It's better for you. I didn't reply. I left the phone face down. I went home, opened the windows. The Dommel carried its usual murmur. I prepared a light soup, toasted bread, cheese. All with measured gestures, almost a ceremony so I wouldn't confuse hunger with anguish. Then I went up to Anna's study. Her folders, her notes, her clear handwriting. That room still smells of ink, of coffee, of logic. I spoke to her, as I sometimes do. It started, Anna. It started without shouting. Like you wanted. The next night Lucas called. I didn't pick up. He called again. I answered. His voice sounded rough, tired, as if fear had scraped his vocal cords. Can we meet? Just the two of us. No. Silence. Breaths. The sound of a car engine far away, maybe his. It wasn't meant like this, he said. We weren't going to hurt you. We just needed a way. The right phrase, I told him, is, we needed your money. He hung up. The prosecutor moved quickly. The recordings, the transfers, the identity fraud attempts. The judge ordered precautionary measures, freezing certain accounts in their name, restrictions on unwarranted proximity. I didn't ask for a ban on contact. I didn't want that. But the law is even in its formalities. I accepted it. Through all this, the city carried on with its summer. That's what cities do, they carry on. One evening I walked along Stratum Scene. The terraces were full, soft music, beer glasses gleaming backlit. I lingered for a few minutes watching a group sing a song I didn't know. The sun set behind the row of buildings, the facades that by night become something else. I thought of public and private life. Of faces when there are witnesses and when there aren't. And I realized I too had versions of myself, Anna's husband, Lucas's father, the widower who walks with steady steps, the man who counts notes for bread with the same care he measures dignity. No one is only one thing. Maybe honesty is simply letting those versions greet each other. I returned home with a cake from a bakery on Bergstraat. I cut it in silence. The clock's ticks. The sky stretched long. I did something that surprised me. I opened the offshore bank folder. Checked the movements. Everything in order. 16 million make no noise when they sleep. Sometimes I think money is the most effective silence. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe to remember that it wasn't loot but a project, something that had to have a purpose beyond being spent on resentments. A few days later, Emma's lawyer asked for a meeting. De Vries agreed on his terms. We met at a cafe near Stadhuisplein, midday. The light was sharp, abundant. We sat in the back. The lawyer, a man with a soft voice, spoke of settlements, of withdrawing certain actions in exchange for others. I listened without interrupting. My mind was elsewhere on the first time I ever saw Emma, in her beige coat, her straight hair, that smile that looked more like a tool than an expression. I didn't like her then. I could never explain why. Now I know, I didn't trust her hunger. Hungry people can be beautiful, but they are dangerous. There will be no settlements, I said. But if she's willing to provide additional information that helps clarify responsibilities, we'll press less for prison time. The lawyer looked at me as if I'd just unfolded an old map. De Vries took notes, impassive. We left. Outside, the sun hit the cobblestones as though polishing them. Life, determined to keep being life. That night, another message came, this time from an unknown number. It was an audio file. I hesitated, thumb hovering. Played it at low volume. Emma's voice, controlled, balanced on that edge between tears and strategy. Noah, I never wanted to hurt you. Lucas has a problem. You know how he is. I tried to stop him. You don't believe me, but I did try. If you withdraw the complaint, I can. I paused. Not for ethics, just exhaustion. Compassion sometimes demands an energy I no longer have. I hit play again. I can give you emails and messages you don't have, names of the people who lent him money and helped him create the accounts. He's scared. He'll do worse if you corner him. I know him. I took a deep breath. Walked to the window. Opened it. The summer air came in like a tame animal. In the garden, the tulips leaned slightly. I decided not to reply immediately. I called De Vries and forwarded the audio. His response was swift, tomorrow at 9. We'll work on it. I slept better that night. Maybe because I'd made a quiet decision, if Emma cooperated, we'd ask for leniency in her case. Not out of kindness, out of efficiency. Punishment should teach, otherwise it's just noise. And I'm tired of noise. On the day of the formal hearing, the sky had forgotten about clouds. I walked early through the city, almost empty, the morning light mirrored in the puddles left by sprinklers. I passed the Evaluan, that spaceship stranded in daily life. I stopped for a moment to look at it from afar. Anna and I had gone there once, long ago. The future had seemed like a flying saucer ready to land on our dinner table. I laughed soundlessly. No one warns you that the future also brings lawsuits, betrayals, lawyers. I kept walking. Stopped at a bakery. Bought bread and coffee. The world is manageable with bread and coffee. At the courthouse, the corridors smelled of paper and nerves. Emma entered first. Avoided my eyes. Lucas followed, paler. The judge listened. De Vries presented the order Anna had prepared, every document in its place, every date in its column. Their lawyers tried the obvious strategy, my supposed fragility. They produced a report from a specialist who'd never met me. The judge frowned. Then I spoke. I described my routine, my appointments, my readings, my walks, my investments. I said Eindhoven as one says home. I didn't falter. The questions came like drops. I answered each one. I didn't drift. Some questions don't seek truth, they seek to exhaust you. I didn't tire. In the end, the prosecutor requested preventive detention for Lucas for risk of flight, attempted manipulation, and use of false identities. For Emma, house arrest and the surrender of her phone. The gavel fell. The sound wasn't loud, but it echoed inside. I didn't look at Lucas when they took him. Not out of hardness, out of modesty. Emma cried without tears. That's when I knew she would talk. And she did. It took a day, just enough to negotiate through her lawyer. She handed over emails, chats, contact lists, a secondary account Lucas used under a childish alias. The naivety of the guilty sometimes helps. That night, alone at home, I didn't celebrate. Judicial victories taste like paper. I made a quieter pact with myself, meaning. I went to the desk and opened a new document. Titled it Anna Foundation. I'm not a man of inspiration, I'm a man of method. I wrote the objectives, legal guidance for the elderly, financial education, a hotline, intervention teams for when family becomes a threat. I wrote slowly, making sure each sentence couldn't be twisted. Then I opened the offshore account folder. Looked at it for a long time. 16 million. A number with no music. I placed something beside it, a plan. Money, like water, needs a channel. The next day, I met with De Vries to outline the structure. We'd need to establish a board, set up oversight, define my role. I don't want this to become another excuse for future family wars. I don't want anyone, 20 years from now, saying Anna Foundation with the same cynicism Emma used for guardianship. This will demand time, De Vries said. And exposure. I'm old, I replied, but I'm not tired. I left and walked toward Dommelstraat. Bought a sandwich. Sat on a bench watching people pass by, students, office workers, lazy tourists, couples who still believe they're eternal. I ate slowly. In that moment, I realized peace isn't a prize. It's a craft. You file it, polish it, care for it. I'd like to say I felt relief. I didn't. I felt order. Which isn't the same, but it will do. That afternoon I went to the Van Abbe Museum, and this time, I went inside. I stopped before a piece that made my breathing slow. Not because of the technique, I don't fully understand that, but because of the stillness it commanded. I thought of Anna. Her clear handwriting. Her folders. The way she always set her cup on the same coaster. This city wears its face in such things, a discreet discipline that holds up what's vast. Phillips. Stridge. The new neighborhoods. And yet, our private lives always fall into disorder. Perhaps that's why we need museums, to remind us that some things can remain untainted. When I stepped outside, the sunset was hard at work, gilding everything. I passed along Kleinberg, nodded to the barista who already recognizes me. My body began to understand that everything would go on, somehow. My phone rang. De Vries. The judge approved temporary custody of your assets under your own terms, with quarterly evaluations. We'll formalize tomorrow. Lucas remains in custody. Emma house arrest, cooperation. I didn't answer with exclamation marks or emojis. I said, thank you. And hung up. That night felt different. I opened the garden door. Stood there, looking at the sky. I didn't want to think about endings. Endings are stories. This was merely a change of season. I went upstairs to the study. Turned on Anna's lamp. Placed my hand on the blue folder. I made her a simple promise that her foresight wouldn't be reduced to punishment, that those papers would build something. I don't always keep my promises. This time, I will. Before bed, I wrote a single line in my notebook: dignity isn't inherited. It's trained. I turned off the light. The clock marked the hours with its usual patience. And for the first time in months, behind that sound, I didn't hear the anxious breath of fear, but the steady rhythm of my own decision. There are nights when one doesn't conquer the world, only one's own room. Sometimes, that's enough. I fell asleep with the window open, the summer drifting in like an old dog that's finally found the cool corner. And I understood that peace, when it comes, announces nothing. It simply sits beside you and breathes. Sometimes I wake before dawn. Not from insomnia, just habit. Anna used to say the cleanest hours of the day are the ones not yet used. Since all this began, I've returned to that old rhythm: black coffee, silence, and the sound of the Dommel flowing behind the garden. In that murmur there's something close to calm, a constancy that reminds me life doesn't need witnesses to keep going. 3 weeks have passed since the hearing. Eindhoven wears its summer in full, as if nothing hurts, bicycles gliding along the canals, the smell of bread in the bakeries on Kleinberg, children playing in the parks with the sun on their faces. And yet, beneath that serenity, the city has another pulse, slower, more honest, the pulse of those still settling accounts with the past. This morning, De Vries called. Emma wants to testify again, he said. She has more information. In exchange for what? Protection. And limited access to money that wasn't directly tied to the fraud. She's ready to sign. I agreed without argument. It's no longer about punishment, it's about closing circles, letting the dust fall where it must. We met at the prosecutor's office. Emma arrived looking changed, no makeup, no careful choreography in her gestures. She looked at me with a mix of fear and relief. Said that Lucas had contacted 2 more people, go-betweens for gambling and debts. That she helped at first, thinking she could save him, until she realized what they were losing wasn't money, but morality. As she spoke, I noticed something strange. For the first time, she wasn't trying to convince me. Just to empty herself. I listened in silence. When she finished, the prosecutor took notes and allowed her to leave. As she passed me, she murmured, "You don't know how much I envy you." I didn't answer. Perhaps there was nothing to say. Outside, the air was warm. I crossed the bridge in front of the Van Abbe Museum, where the water reflects the clouds as if trying to keep them. I thought Anna would have understood that kind of remorse better than I do. She always had an intuition for telling fear apart from forgiveness. I, on the other hand, learned too late not to confuse justice with revenge. That afternoon I met with De Vries's team and a young lawyer who'd joined the foundation project. Her name is Sophie. She has the calm energy of those who believe in what they're building. She showed me the draft of the statutes, the objectives, the first action plan. She read aloud. The Anna Groot Foundation will dedicate itself to the legal and emotional protection of elderly individuals who are victims of family manipulation, fraud, or abandonment. It will provide free legal advice, judicial representation, and temporary financial assistance programs. As she read, I felt something stir in my chest. Not pure emotion, something quieter. Gratitude without the need for tears. Anna would have smiled. Not out of pride, but confirmation. She always said money only makes sense when it stops being invisible. After the meeting, Sophie invited me for coffee at De Coffee Bar on Dommelstraat. It was midday, sunlight filtering through the trees. Around us, the city hummed with summer and conversation. "Will you remain anonymous, Mr. Groot?" she asked. "As long as I can. Causes work better when they don't depend on names." "But you'd inspire others." "I don't want to inspire. I want it to work." Sophie smiled with respect. She reminded me a little of Anna, not in her face, but in the way she held her gaze. Some people look at you as if taking careful measurements of your soul. I walked home. Along the way, I passed an open-air market. Bought flowers and bread. I love the simplicity of markets. No one asks what you do with your life, only how much the fruit costs. When I got home, I placed the tulips in the vase on the dining table, beside Anna's photograph. That night I sat down to write what would be the Foundation's manifesto. Not to publish, but to keep a personal record, to preserve the original intent before bureaucracy wears it down. I wrote, "Aging is not a disease, it's an archive few care to read. The elderly don't lose reason, they lose witnesses. And when there are no witnesses, every abuse looks like love." I read the line several times. Left it as it was. It felt enough. Over the following days, local newspapers began mentioning the Groot case. No details, only rumors. Retired businessman dismantles family fraud. I didn't mind. Headlines are like short epitaphs, they always say less than what truly happened. The foundation began operating in a small office near the center. The space has natural light, white walls, the smell of new paper. When I visited for the first time, Sophie and a young volunteer were putting up the first signs. On the door, a poster read, "Open to listen." I stood there for a while, looking at it. I hadn't imagined those 3 words could carry such weight. Days passed. The trial continued. Lucas remained in custody. I didn't visit him, but I sent a letter. No reproaches, just truth. I wrote, "I don't seek your forgiveness, nor to give you mine. I only want you to understand that the money you tried to steal was meant for something that never excluded you. If you ever learn to see beyond desire, you might realize you didn't lose a fortune, but the chance to be better." I don't know if he read it. It doesn't matter. Summer began to wane. Nights grew cooler, the sunsets longer. One Sunday, Sophie asked me to speak to a group of seniors who had been victims of fraud. I'm no speaker. I simply told my story, plainly. I said, "There's no shame in having trusted. The shame belongs to those who use trust as a weapon." There was silence. Then a woman raised her hand. Her eyes were blue, her skin wrinkled by light, her presence steady. She said, "Sometimes, what hurts most isn't what they take, but who takes it." I nodded. There was nothing better I could add. That night I returned home with a strange feeling, not of victory, but of continuity. The wall clock kept its slow rhythm. The kitchen smelled of roasted coffee. Outside, the sound of crickets and water. Everything the same, and somehow, entirely different. I poured myself a whiskey. Not to celebrate, just to keep my thoughts company. I thought of Anna again. Of her way of anticipating trouble without ever losing tenderness. Of how, even from a distance, she'd managed to save me once more. Sometimes I wonder if lucidity isn't its own kind of faith, the quiet certainty that even as the world crumbles, one can still breathe in an orderly way. I took the black notebook and wrote another line. Love doesn't always rescue us. Sometimes it only trains us not to drown. I turned off the desk lamp. Left the window open. The night came in with its calm, its scent of summer preparing to leave. I sat in the darkness a little longer, feeling that particular kind of silence that doesn't hurt, it teaches. I recorded this one afternoon, a few days ago. Sophie insisted I leave an oral testimony for the Foundation's archives. She said it would give a human face to the story. I don't know if I'm that face, but I agreed. It seemed a good exercise in memory. I placed the microphone on Anna's desk, between her folders and my cup of coffee. Outside, the sun was beginning to fall behind the trees, and the sound of the Dommel drifted through the open window. I didn't rehearse anything. I just spoke. I said, "My name is Noah Groot. I'm 71 years old. I was born in Eindhoven and I'll probably die here. I was an engineer, a husband, a father, and recently accused of madness by those who should have known me best." I don't say that with resentment. I say it for accuracy. For months, I thought betrayal was an incurable wound. That seeing your own son try to erase you leaves a hollow that can't be filled. But now I understand the hollow isn't always loss, sometimes it's space. Space for what comes after. For what's left of you when the noise finally ends. Pause. A sip of coffee. The money Anna left hidden wasn't just a secret, it was her way of securing my freedom for when trust became fragile. 16 million kept in silence, far from pride and greed. She knew that human love rusts quickly when mixed with inheritance. That's why she planned her justice while alive, like someone preparing a garden for after they're gone. I pressed pause. Thought for a moment. Then continued. Lucas is in prison. I don't know if I've forgiven him. Maybe forgiveness isn't a destination but a direction. What hurts me more is what he lost as a son than what he tried to take from me as a man. I remember him small, face smeared with ice cream, knees scraped. You never imagine that boy will end up behind bars. But life doesn't ask, it collects. I looked around, the desk, the photographs, the faint scent of paper and wood. The Anna Foundation is already working. This week we helped 3 people, a 76-year-old woman whose nephew forged her signature, a man who lost his home to a predatory loan, a widow who couldn't understand the bank's papers. I sat with them, listened. No speeches. Just listened. And while listening, I understood something I'd been missing. When you help, your own wound becomes a compass. It doesn't stop hurting, it just hurts with purpose. A rustle of wind at the window. The mic caught the soft tap of a leaf against the glass. Summer is leaving. Eindhoven is cooling down. Soon the rains will come, washing the sidewalks and returning the scent of earth. I don't know how much time I have left. It doesn't worry me. I'd like to live long enough to see someone continue this without my name. I've learned that power doesn't lie in what you have, but in what you choose to leave untouched when you go. And this is what I want to leave behind, a refuge for the old who still believe that trusting is not a flaw. Silence. I sat still for a few seconds, then turned off the recorder. That same evening, I went down to the garden. The sky had that copper hue that signals the end of summer. The yellow tulips bent in the wind. I touched them gently, as if they were relics. Thought of Anna. I pictured her laughing, sitting on the terrace with her glass of wine, eyes half closed against the light. That image is the closest thing to peace I know. I went inside. The clock struck 8. I made soup, bread, a bit of cheese. On the radio, they talked about politics, prices, football. Everything went on. The world doesn't stop for one man's tragedies. And that, in its way, is comforting. I ate slowly. Then poured myself a whiskey, carried it to the study, and turned on the lamp. On the desk, the blue folder still lay there, like a totem. I no longer need it, but I can't put it away. It reminds me that love, when planned, can be fairer than fate. I looked out the window. Bicycle lights crossed the bridge. A father carried his daughter in the basket, both laughing. I saw my reflection in the glass and for a moment couldn't tell whether I was the man who'd been, or the one who remained. I thought of Lucas. Whether he'll ever understand that it wasn't his father who destroyed him, but his own impatience. Maybe when he's out, he'll find his place. Maybe not. It's no longer in my hands. The only thing I can do for him now is to keep alive something that reminds him decency still exists even if he forgot it. I rested my forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the city breathed. The lights of the Van Abbe Museum rippled on the water like trembling lines. Eindhoven has always had that way of being both modern and ancient, a laboratory with a soul. I like that. Maybe that's why I never left. Everything here grows old with dignity. I went to the desk, opened the black notebook, and wrote. I've learned that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the most courteous way to win. I closed the notebook. Sat a while listening to the clock's steady tapping. Funny how the sound of time becomes company once you stop needing haste. I went to bed late. Sleep came slowly, but it came. The next morning, Sophie arrived early with papers to sign. She found me in the garden, watering the tulips. She carried a tired smile. Noah, the first funds are active, she said. We can now offer legal assistance to the entire province. I nodded. Signed where she pointed. Then we sat on the terrace under the awning, with lemonade and silence. Sometimes I think, she said, that all this began as punishment and ended as a promise. That's how things worth doing usually go, I said. They start in pain and end in meaning. She packed up the papers and stood. Before leaving, she said, Anna would be proud. I watched her walk away down the gravel path, her figure fading into the afternoon light. I stayed there alone. The air smelled of summer and of farewell. I closed the door. On the dining table, the tulips were still fresh. I thought of how many times Anna had changed them without me noticing, how many small things quietly hold a life together. I went upstairs to the study. Turned on the recorder one last time. If someone ever hears this, I said, let them understand there are no heroes in this story. Only a man who decided not to let deceit be his final inheritance. Who learned that justice without compassion is merely a refined form of revenge. And that love, sometimes, is simply naming what's right even when it hurts. I stopped recording. Sat in silence. From the window, the city stretched out, alive, oblivious as beautiful. I thought of all that this year had taken, illusions, certainties, bonds. But also of what it had given back, peace, clarity, purpose. I lowered the blinds. The house dimmed. The clock struck another hour. And I knew, with that kind of certainty that asks for no proof, that the story was complete. I don't know if the foundation will outlive me. I don't know if the world will learn anything from this small truth of mine. But I do know that, for the first time in a long while, I sleep with my conscience in order. And that, for a man my age, is worth more than any fortune. The last line of the recording was this. I don't know if I won, or simply stopped losing. But ever since I stopped defending what was never mine, silence has sounded as it should, like peace. I closed my eyes. Outside, the wind stirred the branches. The city kept breathing, and so did I. And that's how it ended. Without noise. With dignity.